Electric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast, celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.
Tubeway Army's 1979 album Replicas was a groundbreaking piece of synthpop music that transformed Gary Numan from an unknown former punk singer to a pin-up pop star. Replicas of course featured the iconic songs Our Friends Electric and Down in the Park among 10 songs in total, but the only version of Replicas I knew for a long time was what was actually essentially a deluxe edition first released in 1997. This CD featured 6 bonus tracks as it turned out, and one of these tracks was easily one of my favourite songs on the album, and a rarity for me, a song longer than 6 minutes that I loved and would never skip, over 8 minutes in fact. It was the mesmerising and damn catchy We Have a Technical. Not knowing it didn't feature on the original album, I'm incredibly surprised that Gary didn't think it was good enough first time round. Perhaps it was simply too long and they needed to cut some songs to fit onto 2 sides of a regular LP. While I also have a soft spot for the gorgeous soundscape of the instrumental I Nearly Married a Human, I'd say We Have a Technical was a much clearer choice than that or the other instrumental When the Machines Rock, but who knows what record company decisions were going on at the time. The song feels like a solid bridge between the slightly unpolished synth rock of Replicas and the synth-pop heavy Pleasure Principle. It opens with an instantly catchy synth riff, with Gary reportedly using a Mini Moog and a Roland SH2000 for the album, along with crunching guitar sounds, joined by Paul Gardner's hard-working bass and the continuous pulsating drumming of Jess Lydiard that never stops.
We have a random on the west side, personality malfunction. He said, I can't give you anything at all, just a room with a bad view of you. He sent a letter to a downside, saying sorry that I missed you, but I can think of better things to do. He's addicted to the time track. We have a technical. We have a technical.
Lyrically, the song touches upon subjects like memory loss, loneliness and confusion. Like with many songs by Gary in this era, particularly on Replicas, it clearly has a sci-fi connection. It appears to be sung from the point of view of perhaps a robot, even one of those sex robots as referenced in Our Friends Electric. As he said himself to The Guardian about Our Friends Electric, the lyrics came from short stories I'd written about what London would be like in 30 years. These machines or friends come to the door. They supply services of various kinds, but your neighbours never know what they really are since they look human. The one in the song is a prostitute, hence the inverted commas. And so it appears in We Have a Technical that this robot is either dying or has become broken in some way. They have a personality problem and is described as a downstat, which is also referenced in the other bonus track, Only a Downstat. A downstat is apparently a Scientology lingo for a person who does not produce enough or a state of not working hard enough. Gary was known to be influenced directly by William S. Burroughs, who himself had followed Scientology in the 1960s. Whoever's singing, whether it's a lost soul, a prisoner or a dying robot, it appears they have been placed somewhere where they don't want to be, confused and alone and surrounded by strangers. It was probably also perhaps a metaphor for how Gary was feeling at the time.
He's in a hotel where they all go, saying, boy, I've lost my memory. It's so surprising just how quickly things can end, like a hero on a platform of friends. This table is so crowded with people that I don't know, and I never really tell my thoughts on you, so the image breaks down again.
main element of this song that I love, however, is the building and hypnotic backing track. Lydiard's drums and Gary's harmonising synths are so solid, I could listen to this build and build all day. The song will be recalled in several future Numan songs. The line "The image breaks down" appears in Cars.
So the image breaks down again. Here in my car, where the image breaks down.
I Could Crawl Around the Floor Just Like I'm Real appears in Metal.
I could crawl around the floor just like I'm real. I could crawl around the floor just like I'm real.
And the ending of the song is a clear precursor to the opening of I Die You Die. So We Have a Technical didn't get a proper release until 1985 when Beggars Banquet put out the EP single 1978-79 Volume 2, a collection of unreleased recordings, which featured songs from the Tubeway Army and Replicas period. This was on one full side on its own, while the other had Fade Out 1930, The Crazies and Only a Downstat. To be totally honest, if it was another version of We Have a Technical that I actually heard before I heard the original, before I owned Replicas as a youth in the mid to late 90s, I actually had a copy of the Numan tribute album Random first, and easily my favourite song on that album was a version of We Have a Technical by, of all people, Blur's Damon Albarn and Weezer's Matt Sharp. It also featured Blur's Dave Rowntree on drums. So Albarn contributed to Sharp's band The Rentals album 7 More Minutes 2 years later in 99, and Matt had performed with Blur the year before in 96. So it appears that the two had become good friends and worked together on a few projects. I found a tweet from Matt Sharp in 2019 when he wrote, 40 years ago, Gary Numan released an album that had a massive impact on both myself and The Rentals. The Pleasure Principle still stands as a work of an absolute perfection, and in 97 Damon Albarn, Dave Rowntree and I recorded this tribute to the maestro, and there's a video of We Have a Technical. And in 1999 Matt spoke to buddyhead.com saying that it was a long time ago. While we were doing the Weezer shows in Europe for the first record, we used to open the shows with an instrumental Gary Numan song. And this guy who put the compilation together was at one of the shows and asked me about it. He later became a fan of The Rentals and asked me if we'd do it. The Rentals couldn't do it because everyone was split up all over the place, so while I was in England, I called Damon to see if he would come down and do it with me, and we're old friends from the tour, and he did. I'm assuming the man in question was Steve Malins, who was putting together the project for Beggars Banquet at the time. Of the album, Gary said,
Steve Malins called me one evening and told me about a project he'd been working on with Beggars Banquet. He called it Random. It would be a double CD, and it would have 26 different bands covering my songs, some new and rising, others well established. It was amazing news. It was such an honour, and Beggars were fully behind it. Steve explained that in his work as a journalist interviewing numerous bands, he had noticed how many times I'd been mentioned as an influence. So he started to ask them if they would be interested in recording a cover version for a tribute album. He then persuaded Beggars to get involved and front the money for the recordings, and it all came together. As I remember our conversations at the time, Steve felt that it would bring me greater credibility once it became known that so many bands saw me as influential and were prepared to take part in the Random project. It was the single most important thing to happen throughout that entire period, arguably one of the most important of my career. The finished album was fantastic, and I was incredibly grateful to the artists that took part. Jesus Jones, Damon Albarn, and Pop Released Itself, to name a few. And to Steve for making it happen. It was released in June and seemed to do exactly what we'd hoped. It brought me recognition as an influential songwriter, and it did seem to change attitudes towards me.
So from what I can tell, correct me if I'm wrong, but Gary has only ever performed We Have a Technical in 2 different tours. The Pleasure Principle tour in 2008 and the Pleasure Principle / Replicas tour in 2024. I went to both of those tours and I have to say We Have a Technical went down so well and it sounds so good live. I'm just surprised it has never really been part of his set. I'd love for him to keep it in, as it was so much fun hearing it in full. So just looking at your comments on the song, Dean Clark said, I couldn't believe it when I first heard this. It was one of the best Numan tracks I'd heard, and I couldn't believe it wasn't on the Replicas album. Still awesome and great live on his 2024 79 tour. Peter Siddiqui said, such a great track, should 100% have been on the album, way too good to be a B-side. Darren Gwilt said, when I first heard We Have a Technical, I thought, why wasn't this track on the original 79 album? Yes, it has a long runtime, but personally I'd have swapped this for I Nearly Married a Human any day. Replicas is a brilliant album, still love it now, fantastic lyrics. My wife, who I converted to Numan a few years ago, said that if she ever met him she would ask him what was so hard to avoid, but when she did meet him she forgot. Paul Murphy said, it actually works better live than it deserves to given the time it takes to play, but I love it live. Phil Norse said, loved it on vinyl, but hearing it for the first time live absolutely blew me away. Still one of Gary's best and underrated tracks. At Creenoid on Twitter said, or X, I keep calling it Twitter, said it is an astonishing track. All of the extra tracks on Replicas and Telecon are absolutely incredible, but this is something extra special. I first heard these on the 3 12-inch singles that Beggars released in 85, was blown away by all of the tracks on here, but We Have a Technical is brilliant. Simon Rippon said, sits right between Replicas and Pleasure Principle. Synth is up front more. The intro foretells I Die You Die and I Don't Believe. The bass seems to echo My Shadow in Vain. Would have been good as the outro track on Replicas, kind of indicating what was to come next. And finally, Dean Hazel said, this track is a tight distillation of all the tracks of Replicas and a sign of things to come for the next 2 albums where lyrics reappear. A standout track that should have replaced the 2 instrumentals on the LP. So yeah, I agree with all of you. Easily one of the best songs on Replicas, and surprised it wasn't included on the original version, and remains one of my favourites of this era. And let's hope we continue to hear it in future tours. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of Electric Friends. I always appreciate your company on these deep dives into Gary Numan's musical journey. Next episode, I'll be exploring another fascinating track from Numan's catalogue. If you'd like to get in touch, you can email me at newmanpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me across social media as @NewmanPodcast on Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the YouTube channel where you'll find all the episodes, including the video versions of these special interviews. I'd love to feature your personal Numanoid stories, whether it's about how you discovered Gary's music or your cherished Numan-related memories. Please send them my way. I'd love to read them out. Visit newmanpodcast.com to learn more, and if you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing, rating and reviewing. Help spread the word to fellow Numanoids. So until next time, see you then.
Eccentric Friends, a Gary Numan podcast celebrating the tracks by a musical pioneer.